Aloha, my name is Neil Yamamoto, and I'm presenting my paper, The Drive to Be Just American, the Japanese-American model minority in the 21st century. In it, I argue that the Japanese Americans today, the third and fourth generations in America, live a dichotomous existence, one that originated with the first Japanese immigrants in 1868 and has at every historical juncture been perpetuated. Today's Japanese Americans are caught between being truly American and never being quite American enough. The history of Japanese American from the first generation to today is cyclical. In one instance, Japanese immigrants are valued for their work ethic, and in another, they are unworthy of citizenship. The first generation Japanese immigrants, the Issei, came to Hawaii in 1868. They were known as the Gannen Mono, or people of the first year. 150 of them came to Hawaii as contract workers. Those who stayed in Hawaii and the United States viewed Hawaii and America as the place where they would raise their families and set their roots. In short, the Issei, much like the first European immigrants, saw America as the land of opportunity. Their children, the Nisei or second generation, would be Americans by birth, but they could not erase their heritage. It was printed in their yellow skin, noted in their jet black hair, and etched in their slanted eyes. In World War II, simply because of their national origin and ancestral homeland, Japanese American citizens were considered to be 4C, enemy aliens unfit for military service. Further, Japanese Americans, by presidential order, were the only ethnic group in the United States to be incarcerated wholesale. In Hawaii, however, the incarceration of Hawaii's Japanese Americans was limited, in part because of a greater tolerance of Japanese Americans here in the territory, but also because of simple economics. Hawaii's Japanese Americans made up nearly 40% of the viable workforce. To incarcerate all of them would be economically unconscionable. The Japanese American internment of World War II was crafted in an era of racial hysteria, but it provided a unique opportunity for Japanese Americans to further prove their willingness to be truly American. If they could endure the hardships of internment using Japanese ideals of gaman, or steadfast endurance, perhaps these unjustly imprisoned Japanese families and Japanese Americans could defeat the misconceptions about their loyalty and become just Americans once and for all. Perhaps if the men of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the most decorated fighting unit of its size and length of service in American history, could fight for the ideals of American democracy and defeat the forces of fascism, then when they returned home from the war, they might be treated as just Americans. This was not the case. Upon their return home, Japanese American veterans faced discrimination, from being denied home loans by major banks and lenders, all the way down to a uniformed Captain Daniel Inoue being denied a haircut in California, as he was told, "We don't cut Jap hair here." Japanese Americans could have remained bitter at their mistreatment after enduring so much hardship during the war. But instead, the Japanese Americans used their Japanese ideals of steadfast endurance to go to college, become educated, and create institutions that would benefit Japanese Americans for years to come. Case in point is the creation of Central Pacific Bank, Hawaii's Central Pacific Bank. It was founded by a man named Sakai Takahashi, a World War II veteran of the 442nd, and other prominent Japanese American World War II veterans who wanted home loans but couldn't get them from major Hawaii banks and lenders due to discriminatory practices. With their new education, Japanese Americans paved the way for a political revolution in Hawaii in 1954. Japanese American-led Democratic Party of Hawaii assumed control of the territorial legislature, and 5 years later, upon statehood, Japanese Americans were elected to the United States Congress from the new state of Hawaii. At each juncture, Japanese Americans used their uniquely Japanese ideals of steadfast endurance, quiet intensity, and a firm belief that had been passed on from the first generation immigrants, that America was the place of the future. And it was a place that they would eke out a uniquely American and Japanese experience. This dichotomy exists today and continues today. But the hardship for the 21st century Japanese American is in his assertion of his Americanness while honoring his Japaneseness. Japanese Americans today don't want to be one or the other exclusively. Speaking from personal experience, we want to be both, and we should be able to be. Being Japanese American, as I said, is not mutually exclusive. The Japanese American of the 21st century wants nothing more than to be treated equally by his fellow citizens and wants to be seen as a part of the melting pot of America. The 21st century Japanese American wants what his great-grandfather wanted: for America to be the land of opportunity where he could stake out a better future for his family and for future generations. This is the drive to be just American, not just for Japanese Americans, but for all of us. Thank you.